We are here with Kiwi, Tough Love, who's been keeping an eye on New Zealand for us since earlier this year, and we are doing an end-of-the-year wrap-up. Some of the slices, a sample that has stood out the most as we have mapped the developments on the front lines of the culture wars down under. So this is a roundup from Oz.
Auckland too much like China, says Chinese immigrant and real estate agent. It was a letter written by a Chinese property agent who has concerns about the direction that Auckland's heading in. He originally wrote the letter to Winston Peters, who is a politician that covers this kind of thing. I'll just read some of the quotes out from the article that stand out. Instead of seeing a balanced ethnic mix, Auckland has started to acquire an unwholesomely Chinese flavour. There are poorly designed, cheap signs written only in Chinese or with minimal English at every corner of the central suburbs. A recent encounter with two young Japanese professionals in Tokyo amused me. Going to Auckland is like going to China, they said. You don't hear English. You don't see Kiwis. There's just Chinese, and Chinese. And then he goes on to talk about how this relates to the real estate scene as well. He says that while statistics show that there have been 3 to 5% foreign buyers in the market, and this has been a big issue in New Zealand this year, it's about is the housing shortage that's happening because of foreign buyers from China buying up property. And there have been figures that release saying yes, and then there have been blowback saying no. But he's saying here, is it what we have been seeing across the auction rooms or at open homes for the past half decade? I remember seeing young couples with their hands clenched and eyes glued to the auction screen, only to find their first dream house outbid by someone screaming in Mandarin. This has been in the public profile quite a lot this year, and it's part of a sort of wider picture relating to China and immigration in general. There's a book that's just been released recently by a guy called Ron Asher, and it's called In the Jaws of the Dragon, How China is Taking Over New Zealand. And what he does in this book is he outlines how China's approach is to arm their navy massively and use free trade agreements and the purchasing of assets to gain power. Ron Asher's book, it's full of really good source material and quotes. And there's just one little snippet here that I really like. And it's from a major newspaper in New Zealand. So it's not coming from fake news, it's coming from real news. And the quote is from a billboard at a Chinese military base. Not in New Zealand, in China. On the billboard it says, "Without haste, without fear, we will conquer the world." Pretty clear. Now, this is during a year when immigration in New Zealand, the figures have been, I think it's been the highest on record. It's been quite a big deal here. Even the Greens in New Zealand, even the Green Party have spoken out against how high the figures are, and they're talking about a major cutback. There was an article that I posted on Red Ice that was talking about how there are now over 200 minority groups in Auckland alone. And what they're doing is they're increasingly running for local bodies such as councils to advocate for their people and their voices. And essentially they're all saying like, you know, I too am Auckland. And it just sort of raises the question, how can so many interests and so many groups in this country all have their own voices and be effective under one governing structure? One of the signs of hope is the New Zealand First Party led by Winston Peters. And Winston Peters, he's been in the game for quite a while. He was Deputy Prime Minister at one point. He has been speaking out a lot this year about various shenanigans going on with Chinese buying up assets in New Zealand, the Chinese government interfering in New Zealand, dumping. There was a big stink this year about them dumping substandard steel in New Zealand, which of course flooded the steel market in this country and put a lot of pressure on the local steel manufacturers that are already here. He also speaks out against Muslim immigration. There were a number of articles ran in the media about him talking about how we need extreme vetting for Muslim immigration. Rings a bell, doesn't it? He talks about how the Muslim values don't reflect those of New Zealanders, which I think is really nice. And the irony about this guy too is that he's part Maori. So he gets away with a lot more, of course, in the media than just a normal white guy would. He can say things that would usually just be plastered immediately and discarded as racist, but because he's got the brown card, he gets a little more airtime, and people are still kind of like, oh yeah, it's Winston saying the normal things again. Yeah, you know, thanks Winston, now shut up. New Zealand First have been gaining in popularity over the past few years. They've been up and down. I don't know what chance there is of them actually ever getting in and actually having control of this country. But maybe as these things crank up and the immigration increases more and more and more and more, and there are more and more assets being bought, New Zealanders will hopefully shift over to the right and start voting for a party like them. New Zealand web series tackles racism in education. This is an initiative that was launched recently by Auckland University, and I'll just read from the heading on their YouTube channel. It says, "I Too Am Auckland" is a student initiative dedicated to the collaboration of Pacific Islander and Maori students and the wider University of Auckland community. This series of YouTube videos focuses on racism in education and how it affects ethnic minorities.
Now we're going to move on to public health. One of the very unfortunate things about New Zealand is we have very high rates of obesity and health-related problems. Those problems are especially high in Māori and Pacific communities. The reality is, Māori and Pacific people need to stop smoking, drinking, and eat healthier.
She did not just say that. It's like this in so many of my classes, saying we're always the problem. It's like she's saying that it's our fault.
That's not cool at all.
We were worried about the way you presented some of the material in today's lecture.
Oh, what were you concerned about?
In class, you made it seem as if the poor health outcomes among Māori and Pacific people was all their responsibility, but you didn't address all the other factors connected to social inequality that influence those problems.
Yeah, like Riley, I see some of the problems you're talking about, even among some members of my family, so this is very personal for me. There are so many fast food places and liquor stores all around us, and eating healthy can be really expensive. It's not easy. And there are other problems too. People get harassed by police and face discrimination when applying for jobs.
I'm sorry, I didn't realize it came across that way. There are many other factors that should be considered here. They felt I was blaming Māori and Pacific communities for their poor health outcomes. I was being unfair.
Maybe we should rethink how we teach our curriculum.
Should we be making a greater effort to include subjects like colonisation into our lectures?
This might be a good time for us to reflect on our positioning and knowledge of the Māori and Pacific cultures.
After all, our responsibility as university staff.
I too am Auckland.
I too am Auckland.
I too am Auckland.
Horrible propaganda here, obviously aimed at the New Zealand population, the Kiwis, the Europeans. It's interesting, I think, that they're using children in this way.
It is interesting. I was reading through the comments on the YouTube video, and there was actually a comment by the I Too Am Auckland people, and they said that they've been receiving a lot of questions as to why they only included Maori and Pacific Islanders in the video, and they didn't, give voice to all of the other ethnic minorities in Auckland. There are many, many, many videos on their YouTube channel. A lot of them are interviews with Maori and Pacific Islanders about their experiences with racism in New Zealand, and their reply saying why they only chose Maori and Pacific Island peoples was because, well, Maori are the indigenous people of the country, so that made sense. And the Pacific in general has suffered greatly from colonisation. So they were kind of trying to keep it local in some respects, and excluding the other 200 plus minorities that exist in the Auckland region. To their credit, in some respects, they did have like an Asian kid and an Indian kid in there who are also saying that they could be responsible for some kind of unconscious racism. But the main point is that the blame for in this example, the poor health of Maori is colonisation. So that's specifically aimed at white people. And this video is part of a lot of things that have happened this year, a lot of campaigns and articles that have come out trying to tackle racism in this country. There is this perception that, lurking in the back blocks of every small town of New Zealand is teeth-gnashing neo-Nazis who hate anyone who's not pure white. That could be true. I don't really care if it is. But the standouts that we had this year were the Human Rights Commission launched the That's Us campaign. Sounds very much like I Too Am Auckland. And what they did is they called for New Zealanders to submit letters that talk about their experiences with racism in this country. And of course, I submitted my letter talking about the racism that I've experienced, which was all true. And I talked about some experiences that friends of mine have had. That's all true. I went on the website this morning, actually, to have a look at what's been published. And there's 3 pages of submissions. Not a single European New Zealander is represented within those submissions. My letter's certainly not there. I didn't even go into reading any of them. I was just looking at the demographics. We also had a independent study that came out that links the poor learning outcomes of Maori students with the unconscious bias of their teachers. I posted an article on Red Ice about this during the year. Just briefly, it's by a guy called Anton Blank, who it's hard to tell what ethnicity he is originally, but he's one of these contractors that lends his services to, helping children's rights groups. And he did this study where they compared African American students and Maori students, and they did studies in the classroom apparently. And basically it's saying that teachers prefer people that look like them, and so they spend less time with students that don't look like them, and the blame is the unconscious bias. We all know that that's aimed at white people. And then we had a lot of articles published. I mean, I'm sure that there were many more than what I came across, but I put whatever I found on Red Ice. We had one entitled, Is Auckland Council Too White? Now, this article was written by an Asian guy. We had Dunedin street names too white, which talked about how the pool that developers can draw from, the pool of names, there's too many predominantly white Anglo-Saxon European names within that pool. And we even had a Maori professor come out who works at a local university, and he said that the university who employs him needs to change their name because the university's named after a prime minister from the 1930s who wrote some, what he calls white supremacist things. I say they were more pro-white things back at that time. He basically talked about how New Zealand is the purest Anglo-Saxon nation that there is, and it should remain that.
Awesome.
And it should remain that way. So he's for his people, and he did. There was something against other races in his quote. He talked about how he had no love for the Chinese people, and he was glad that there was no problem with that in New Zealand.
So it's a guy. It's a guy who favors his group in the same way that many of these Maoris are favoring their group.
Exactly. This whole I Too Am Auckland thing. It's natural for people to advocate for their own groups. Should we go to China and start chanting I Too Am Beijing?
Would never work.
The problem, it'd never work. We'd get laughed out of the country. I mean, New Zealand's a country that used to be 98% white. That was the immigration policy that we used to have. So this whole multicultural New Zealand narrative that's being pushed now, it's only been in place since the 1970s. So what I'm thinking about is the retaliation against this. I mean, these are specific campaigns and articles that are designed to give voice to those who have been subjugated by white people, and white people aren't included in these campaigns. And it makes me think of the sorts of things that are happening in the States and Canada with the postering. You know, these very simple messages. Hey, white person, are you sick of ... with some links? And I can see some good opportunity for some campaigns that are tailored towards a New Zealand audience to do with the colonisation narrative, for example, and multiculturalism. So I encourage people to whenever there's a campaign that's launched asking for submissions, submit them. Take some examples from what's been happening in the States with the postering and start putting those up with website links on them, linked to Red Ice. The environment has really ripe here, and it's been ramping up this year, something wicked, and there must be more people than what we know getting really sick of it.
I Too Am Auckland. It was written by Bartek Goldman with the two N's, and apparently we just did some peripheral research on this gentleman, and I believe he's an immigrant himself, I guess, from Germany. I don't think the spelling with two N's indicate that he's Jewish, but who knows? Who knows? Anyway, so he's part of this council, to basically advance Maori interest and look after them and everything else. If you even just do a quick search for him and go to his Facebook page, you can actually see that he directly likes pages such as counter signal memes for anti-fasci comrades. He likes things such as super dank anarchist memes, critical theory research network, People's Party of the USA, just full-on communism. So this gentleman is actually using his stance within the position that he has at the university to advance his own political ideologies. I mean, this is amazing. He's using this as a tool to advance it and basically demonize, New Zealand people and their way of life for his own, interests in critical theory and Marxism and anarchism and anti-fascism. So I scream foul play here by this gentleman who pushes this through children as well.
There's a line in that video, perhaps we need to talk more about the effects of colonisation in our lessons. And I sort of think to myself, well, Auckland University and guys like this, I would have thought that it would be all over the curriculum. I wouldn't think that there would be need to anything added. I mean, maybe if we're looking at primary school, maybe that's what they're looking at, starting injecting it into kids that age to really butter them up. It's a bit late by the time they get to university for some of them, but all these young kids, ripe for the picking. Auckland Law Group spoofs Justin Bieber's Sorry hit to highlight race relations. Henrik, I'm sure that the audience is well familiar with Justin Bieber's hit single Sorry that came out this year.
Warning: the following footage may offend One Law for All activists. If you do not wish to be offended, please turn a blind eye, as you have been for the past 170 years.
Ugh.
I know it's not always clear when you're ceding your sovereignty. The Commonwealth comes with a price, that's why we made Article 3. We probably don't have the best understanding of human rights.
Oh.
Is it too late now to say sorry? We know the treaty was more than a nullity. Yeah, I know you don't like the British crown. Come on, turn that frown upside down. We thought you would have moved on by now.
Edgy stuff here,
Look at these cucky white men.
Yeah.
If you want us to.
Look at
What the
that.
hell's going on here?
We can't pronounce Tere or Mari, cause it's pretty hard to say Whangarei. At least you've got Waitangi dead. Sorry. It's been 176 years since the Treaty of Waitangi was signed, and so many of us still talk like we're Don Brash at Orewa. We can be better than this, NZ, but it's going to take more than just saying we're sorry.
What the hell are we looking at here?
I mean, getting on a rant about these issues can just go on for hours. There are so many different angles to it, but I think that people need to try and keep things really simple. I mean, in this video, of course, they're saying sorry for this mishandling that happened between the British Crown and Maori in our history. To keep it really concise, this mishandling is apparently around the Treaty of Waitangi, which was our founding document signed in 1840. And the modern narrative is that there were confusions over the interpretation of words that were written in Maori by the British. The point of the treaty was for Maori to cede complete sovereignty to the British Crown in exchange for the Queen's rule of law. And for the first time in colonial history, they were made British citizens equal with the European settlers that were coming here. Now, when you engage people in this debate to do with the meanings of words and who interpreted what, you go down so many rabbit holes that it just ends up in a complete mess. And I just like to say this to all European New Zealanders out there, that you want to keep things really simple. And I always just use one simple thing, and I see it as the kill shot for these debates. And that is when you go back to the speeches that were given by Maori chiefs at the signing of the Treaty of Waitangi and at the Kohimarama conference that was held about 20 years later. And the transcripts from these speeches, I mean, they're actually really moving because they demonstrate the understanding that was happening at the time and what Maori were asking for and what the Crown, actually quite reluctantly, were giving them. It's in the words of these chiefs that they understand. Whether they agreed with the treaty or not, it's in their words that they understand what they were giving up. Now, you can engage people in this debate and they will say, well, those transcripts from the original meetings were falsified by the British Crown to try and make it look like they didn't try to screw the natives. So,
right.
I mean, then you go into a conspiracy theories and it's like, what do you say? But I encourage everybody to Google the Kohimarama conference speeches and read them for yourself, because that's the red pill that you can't really argue with if you believe that the transcripts are true.
I wanted to give the viewer also an opportunity to understand that this is part of the pressure and the climate that is on young New Zealanders. This is through humor and so-called comedy and parodies and everything else, and it contains this very strictly politicized issue of making New Zealanders of European descent feel bad about who they are, and it's a very ugly face that is rearing itself here. And it's going to do a tremendous disservice, as you said. This country was founded by European, people, and for them not to be able to have their own interests or legitimize themselves as a group is something that no one would superimpose on any other people. It's just okay because they're Europeans, they're white, they have to be punished. So let's go back to those main points again of the 101 picture here, that these are weapons used against you guys down there.
Not only did Europeans found this country in terms of the civilization, but it was asked for by the Maori people. This is demonstrated in the speeches. This is what they wanted as a resolution to the turmoil that they were already experiencing before we came here. People need to get that really clear. Go back to the speeches. And the way that this video is delivered, it's delivered by young people who have just got their law education from what's essentially a Marxist institution. And now they're using this pathetic song to degrade the people who have been beating this drum for many, 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 many years. The video mentions at the beginning One Law for All and Don Brash. Now, One Law for All is a grassroots political party who have been trying to combat this kind of division that's been sown by interpretations of the treaty demonstrated in this video. Don Brash is a very prominent political figure. He was part of the National Party, and this year he's just launched a new political party called Hobson's Pledge. And Hobson's Pledge sets out very clearly, point by point, that they are rejecting this interpretation of the treaty, which has grown up a huge industry of reparation payments, and that they want it to be written out of politics so that New Zealand can become more of a equal society. Now, the problem with stories and narratives pushed by groups like Hobson's Pledge is that what they do is they say, look, New Zealand's a multicultural society. It's based on equality. And so no one group, as in Maori, should be getting special rights above everyone else based on a misinterpretation of the treaty. So they still fall back on New Zealand's multicultural, we're all equal. And I think that's important now, because that's the game that's being played, and that's the game they need to play in order to resolve these issues of our founding document. Moving forward, New Zealand being a multicultural society based on equality, that's only going to perpetuate any problems. I mean, let me be clear. If it wasn't for the Treaty of Waitangi, there would be another wedge issue that was being used as an excuse to demonise Europeans and increase immigration. So solving this issue is not going to be the be-all and end-all for this country. These other issues need to be addressed. You can never have equality in a multicultural society. I mean, we know this. One really positive thing that's happened this year, directly combating the results of this misinterpretation of the treaty that's exemplified in this ghastly video, is the actions of a group called Democracy Action. And they're an independent lobby group in Auckland who made submissions to the unification of the different areas of Auckland into what's called the super city. This was a big issue earlier in the year. The Auckland Unitary Plan, and it addresses all sorts of factors, especially housing, how the city's going to work. But what they did is they got a very important piece of legislation thrown out of the Auckland Unitary Plan, which was relating to sites of cultural significance, where Maori can say yes or no to a private property owner doing anything to their land at all based on whether there is a site of cultural significance anywhere within a certain radius of their house. So if they want to do some landscaping, for example, they have to consult with local iwi. It could be sometimes a number of local iwi or tribes paying a fair bit of money to get permission to start works. Now, this is all based on this modern misinterpretation of the treaty, that Maori have separate rights from the rest of New Zealand. Democracy Action lobbied, and they got this clause thrown out of the Auckland Unitary Plan. So it does show that big change can be made through advocation, through perseverance and lobbying. Major hurdles can be overcome. Greens walk out of Australian politicians' anti-Islam Senate speech.
Australia has embraced migrants from all different races, making us one of the most multiracial nations on earth. Most have assimilated, and I welcome them from the bottom of my heart.
Now, that's a really important issue that she mentions this in the beginning of the clip so that we don't have any mistake of where she's coming from here. But as we'll see, it's not going to matter.
As they integrate and assimilate, the disruption caused by diversity diminishes. Why then has Islam had such an impact on Australia like no other religion? Islam sees itself as a theocracy. Islam does not believe in democracy, freedom of speech, freedom of the press, or freedom of assembly. It does not separate religion and politics. It is partly a religion, but much more than that. It has a political agenda that goes far outside the realm of religion. Australia is now seeing changes in suburbs predominantly Muslim. Tolerance towards other Australians is no longer the case. Muslims are imprisoned at almost 3 times the average rate. Their rate of unemployed and public dependency is 2 to 3 times greater than the national average. Terrorism is not only seen around the world, but is now a part of our society, with Muslim refugees involved in the Lint cafe siege, the Curtis Chang murder in Sydney, and the stabbing of the 2 police officers in Melbourne. The Grand Mufti and other Muslim leaders are deafening with their silence.
And note that they're walking out when she's actually bringing up the terrorism issue, which is should be the biggest issue that they would agree with. So,
but it's fake news, Henry.
Oh, well, yeah, that's true. That is fake news. Just beheadings and all that stuff.
Or lack of sympathy. Radicalisation is happening on our streets, suburbs, in mosques, yet our leaders continue to tell us to be tolerant and embrace the good Muslims. There is no sign saying good Muslim or bad Muslim. How many lives will be lost or destroyed trying to determine who is good and who is bad? Civil tensions is on the rise across the country. Their tolerance to our customs has seen Christmas carols no longer sung at some schools and Bibles not to be found in most hospitals.
We'll find out if they're good, or bad when they do the terrorist action. So then we can deal with the situation.
And even then, it doesn't really matter.
Pauline Hanson, obviously, One Nation Party of Australia. At least she had the balls to say something about this when everyone else is just quiet and is ignoring this issue.
Yeah, I mean, kudos to her. She stood up there and really said it like it is, or even if it's not like it is, she still said it. I mean, it takes a lot of guts. She's quite a character. She's the daughter of fish and chip shop owners in Australia. So she's about as kind of like working class Aussie as you can get. And she rose to prominence in the 1990s with the One Nation Party, but I think she was kicked out and she kind of went underground. But back then she had a similar agenda that she was pushing, but it was more aimed at the Chinese population back then. I suppose Islam wasn't really so much of a thing. I've got a quote here from her maiden speech that I could read. This was in 1996, and it says here, this is from the Wikipedia page, it says, Hanson appealed to economically disadvantaged white Australians by expressing dissatisfaction with government policy on Indigenous affairs, saying that, quote, present governments are encouraging separatism in Australia by providing opportunities, land, monies and facilities available only to Aboriginals, very similar to New Zealand, of course. Along with millions of Australians, I'm fed up to the back teeth with the inequalities that are being promoted by the government and paid for by the taxpayer under the assumption that Aboriginals are the most disadvantaged people in Australia. I've done research on the benefits available only to Aboriginals and challenge anyone to tell me how Aboriginals are disadvantaged when they can obtain 3 and 5% housing loans denied to non-Aboriginals. The nation is being divided into black and white, and the present system encourages this. I'm fed up with being told this is our land. Well, where the hell should I go? I was born here, and so were my parents and children. I will work beside anyone, and they will be my equal, but I draw the line when told I must pay and continue paying for something that happened over 200 years ago. Like most Australians, I worked for my land. No one gave it to me. Pretty bold statements. Again, it's falling back on this whole, like, I'll embrace anyone and what we need is equality. And I know that that's the game that we're playing, and they kind of need to say that in some ways, but it's an issue that's going to need to be addressed because the inequality is going to continue. I mean, doesn't matter what.
All of this just shows what a misery multiculturalism is, and that includes colonialism. Although the fact that, of course, the colonialism of the 18th and 19th century was very different than the kind of neo-colonialism that we're getting with these new waves of migrants and refugees now, where there's already an established country in place where many of these people can go to and simply stand in line and get handouts and welfare and everything else. When Europeans arrived in many of these countries, there was not only maybe hostile environment overall, they had to, crop out a place for themselves and survive single-handedly and on their own in many cases. So it's a very different situation, but it all shows what misery it is when you start moving populations around in all these different people, and there's always going to be someone that is getting squeezed out, if you will.
That's right, and Pauline Hanson, she's kind of made her comeback in the past year or two with the One Nation Party. The One Nation Party won 9% of the vote in Queensland, and Hanson won a seat in the Senate where she'll serve for 6 years. That's where she was delivering that speech. So hopefully their popularity just gains and gains and gains, and there can actually be some official reversal of these problems. The Hebrews. New Zealanders are going to love this one. This is a piece that I found on Maori television. It wasn't anywhere to be found in the mainstream news, understandably. It wasn't exactly a news story. It was just a little more of an article that they ran on their website. But yeah, it's about an interesting alliance that's happening in this country, and I think that the viewers should just take a look, and we'll go from there.
We're inside the only Jewish kura in the country. The new generation of students called the Hebrew who are carrying the mantle.
Nuna pui taku papa, no America taku mama, he hurai aho.
Since the day he was born, 8-year-old Desan has been immersed in te reo Māori. But for the last 2 years, Desan's focus has been on his Jewish heritage.
This guy is the Hebrew. We've coined a new phrase. We've got a whole new whakapapa in the north, and it's the Hebrew. So Janice, the Jew from New York City, and he's the Hebrew.
Oh my God.
He said it.
160 students enrolled from preschool to year 8. Desan is one of 6 Jewish Māori kids attending Karima School. Have you boys ever been to Israel?
Yep, we've been 4 times now.
Of course.
Who paid?
Yeah, exactly. All it costs money.
This is the only Jewish kura in Aotearoa, a hidden gem in central Auckland, where students and their whānau are encouraged to treasure Jewish values,
honour your father and your mother,
become immersed in te reo Hebrew, and embrace te reo Māori.
We have always had to embrace local culture as well as try and retain our own. So I find that it's completely consistent and apropos that Kadima not only helps retain our own culture as Jews, but also embraces the reo, the culture of the Māori people that are the people of Aotearoa. So that's really important for me as a Jew and as a mother.
So, I think it's funny that another instance here, what we've seen so far, is an attack on heritage, is an attack on culture. When in this case, I guess it's 2 of the most victimized groups, at least as far as New Zealand is concerned, and they're precious little gold nuggets here they can hang on to in terms of cultural heritage and tradition, and it's beautiful, and let's keep it going. They're very happy to erode, in fact, these same values for Europeans in New Zealand.
That school is a very, very, very sacred space where the victim groups must be nurtured to become strong members of society so that they can advocate against white colonisation that's still continuing today. I find it really interesting that this is something that's really celebrated, and I'm wondering how genuine it is, or whether it's just another way to signal about A, how progressive and liberal the Jewish community is, and B, how New Zealand is such a multicultural melting pot, Goy. We've now got yet another hybrid.
I think it's an advertisement for Jewish tolerance. I wonder if they would really be welcoming of a Maori Jewish hybrid, or if they would simply, say, well, whatever, they're not really Jews, but it looks good towards the outside world. See, we can assimilate with them and this other victim group and kind of use them against you to erode your culture. I see it as a weapon again, and not as tolerance or love.
And once these people have been used, to project forward, once the New World Order has been implemented on the planet, are people like this just going to be discarded as tools that have served their purpose, and now they no longer actually have access to the Jewish faith?
What do you say? This is just hilarious. I had no idea that this was a thing there. But
neither did I.
There you go.
Neither did I. It really threw me for 6 and made me laugh really quite hard. It's a bit of comic relief for the audience.
Thank you, Tough Love. Do more reports for us. Keep us updated on whatever goes on down under. We need to get information about how things go down there.
Sure thing, we'll do.